Everyday Samurai, Episode 53. Greetings, friends, and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. As you may know, our focus here is on mindset, armed martial arts in the samurai tradition, and the science of political economy, as more of the world around us appears to be spinning out of control with dysfunctional political systems on the verge of collapse and many cultural institutions in rapid decline. The need to fortify the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of our being becomes even more crucial. We must always remember that the way of the warrior is found in death, according to the Hagakure. This is not only unique to Japan. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War that war is the ground of survival or extinction, and the Western traditions of classical antiquity, including the Stoics exemplified by Marcus Aurelius, use the phrase memento mori to keep the inevitability of death present in mind. This is not intended to be depressing, there's enough of that out there already. Rather, an awareness of death reminds us to appreciate life, to be careful in small matters, and recognize that our time on earth is limited and therefore precious. Learning to deal with the inevitability of death, loss, or other forms of suffering is a skill that needs to be cultivated, particularly by those that consider themselves warriors. I was recently invited on the Death Dhamma Podcast to discuss my experiences in dealing with death through my military and law enforcement misadventures. The show has a Buddhist orientation, and while I'm conversant with those teachings, the principles involved are universal and useful to everyone, regardless of their spiritual beliefs or religious orientation. Just as in training in the samurai-related martial arts, what matters is the repeated practice of specific techniques that lead to an embodiment of principles. Again, emphasizing the need for repetition in order to get there. The essence of technique, just like sharpening a sword involves grinding off excess metal from the blade, is clearing away the emotional baggage involved with attachment to the self and our experiences, especially the traumatic ones. In this way, we have the potential to hone our minds into a sharp tool for navigating life's challenges right until the end of our time on the earthly plane, and even turn our painful events and emotionally charged memories into the fuel of empowerment. With that in mind, let's join in to the Death Dhamma interview.
Today, we are learning from Ken Yamarashi. And, I want to say so much because I have learned about him and he has such an interesting background. But you already know, all of you, that what I've learned is that the smartest thing for me to do is to let other people share their backgrounds from their perspective. And so this is where I just get to say, welcome, Ken, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, good.
My name is Ken Yamarashi, and that's a pen name. I write and do some training at everydaysamurai.life, and the best way to find my work is link.everydaysamurai.life. I say that we are in service to liberty and the security of a free state, and that's a free state for the individual as well as society. And so liberation of humanity and the individual is really what we're all about. We're about empowerment, and I write about mindset, martial arts, and political economy.
That is beautiful. May I ask you, how did you arrive at that? And that might be I might have just opened a can of worms. Like, that might be a big question, but I just find that so interesting and unique. And I know that it's helpful. And I wonder how you came to knowing this was what you needed to do.
I have a military and law enforcement background. I guess if we go back to the very beginning, I came from a violent household where the divorce occurred. But prior to that, there was a lot of slamming doors and arguments and throwing of furniture and hurt feelings. And so I went into the security-related fields, again, military and law enforcement. I kind of knew that was what I wanted to do from a very young age. And I think that, those early traumatic experiences certainly shaped the direction of my life. And I had a strong inclination towards the martial arts, and particularly of the Japanese variety. So I grew up in the 80s, and there was a ninja boom, and Shogun was on television and things along those lines. So I gravitated towards those disciplines and stuck with it fairly consistently throughout my life. And so I got exposed to Buddhism of the Zen variety because there's a lot of connection with Zen in the martial arts. And again, associated with the ninja is this idea of esoteric Buddhism. So that has informed the way that I look at things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm open. I like to say that I'm at home in anyone's church. However, I think that there are great lessons to be learned from those teachings of Buddhism. And now that I live in Japan, I get to go to a lot of temples and visit shrines and famous locations and participate in some of those esoteric Buddhist ceremonies. So I'm very blessed.
That is beautiful. Thank you. I want to thank you for a couple of things already, which is, first of all, that you took your admiration of what you were seeing on TV and in the movies in the 80s and channeled it for good. I have some memories of being chased up and down the hallway by my brother, who was practicing whatever he had seen in the latest movie, and me just running around in terror. Obviously, it ends fine because I'm here. But so thank you for using that for good. And I also really appreciate that phrase, I'm comfortable in anyone's church. That's a really nice phrase of the openness to the different systems, belief systems of others. So thank you for bringing that right away. I love that.
I believe that ultimately you can find one single source of all thing and ultimate reality. And I think you can come to that conclusion from a variety of different paths. Yet at some point, it all derives back to one source. And there's a lot of different traditions and practices that can get you there.
Mm-hmm. And on our paths, we all, on our different paths, whatever they may be, we experience loss, things or ideas or relationships. And I know that you have some stories and examples to share with us of how that has shown up in your life.
Definitely. This derives a lot from, well, number one, there was a relationship in my life that went away after a divorce, and looking for shelter, safety, security, and all the things. Ultimately, you come to realize that there is none of that can truly be relied upon. So where do you go? The only place you can go is within your mind and the way that you view the world. Yet in my law enforcement experience especially, I came across several instances where death occurred suddenly. And I remember vividly in a good relationship and joking with a waitress that I interacted with frequently, never really outside of that environment of the restaurant that you go to frequently when you're in a small town. And one day you're joking with her, and the next day driving to work, I responded to a car crash that she was involved in and watched her bleed out on the side of the road.
Oh, wow. That seems so difficult.
One day you're joking and smiling and having a good interaction, and the next day you're watching the medics do CPR on her in her final death throes.
Wow.
And it really is shocking.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you process that? And then additionally, speaking about current events, I mean, there's a veteran suicide epidemic. I've had several friends that I've known from both the military and law enforcement take their own lives. I wasn't there to witness it, but to hear about it, social media, in the news, or things along those lines, you're like, my goodness, that person had so much going on for them. And then to not know what was really happening inside that led them to take such drastic measures. I see that quite frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's not current events, well, I certainly have the memories, and those flash into my experience from time to time as well. So
it stays.
Learning how to deal with that is a huge, huge coping necessity.
That you had every day on the job and that you still have with you every day now. Right?
Those memories stay with me and pop up. Again, I could be doing the dishes or some other mundane task, folding the laundry, and then again, these images or these packets of information show up, and it really makes me cringe, or just a shockwave rolls through my body.
Yeah, that's. I appreciate you pointing that out, because I think that for a lot of us, sometimes there's that, when is this going to end? And it doesn't, but I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think it's part of being human.
It's inevitable, isn't it? The last step in life is death.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have, you have this, and I can picture it as you tell the story. I picture it that perhaps maybe you went here every day for breakfast or lunch. And so, yes, you have this rapport with this person. They become like a friend. Sure, it's the friend you see in the restaurant who brings you your coffee and your pancakes, or, what have you. But that, yes, you see this person every day, and we don't think about this person being gone. And then in the context of your work, you are at the call where this person goes. And then, as you mentioned, as a veteran, and knowing that other veterans have taken their lives and have gone from illness too, that this is something that's always with you. And I think you've already kind of touched on this, but one of the things I wanted to ask you is like in some of these examples, did you foresee what did you foresee? I guess maybe I could ask you that. Sometimes I say like, well, did you foresee this happening? I think with the waitress, no. And with the other ones, I don't know. What did you foresee?
Not in the immediate sense. And having a feeling about something that might unfold is not the same as foreseeing it. You can have a bad feeling, I believe something bad's going to happen. Like, my experience in Iraq, I was explosive ordnance disposal, also known as the bomb squad. So you can have a feeling that something's not right, and then within a few minutes, the bomb goes off. But you can never know where and when the exact occurrence will take place. So the only thing you can do is prepare. But I wanted to really convey another story because it talks about the idea of cause and effect. And there's always cause and effect operating in our lives. That's one of the teachings. And it's interesting how karmically linked we are to all phenomenon. It reminds me of Indra's net, that idea that the whole universe is a web and that at every intersection of those lines, there is a jewel that reflects all other activity. And I think we also hear about the butterfly effect. So at some level, I believe that all things are connected or interconnected. And I believe that's the Buddhist concept of dependent arising. So there is always that something that we can perceive, or maybe that we don't. We operate in ignorance. That's one of the three poisons, right? Ignorance, avarice, and greed. So there are certain things that are happening or occurring under the surface that we're not aware of, but sometimes we get flashes of cause and effect and we see those relationships. And so I'll convey a story from my law enforcement days where I dwell upon this frequently, in that I would go to work and check what new warrants had been issued, and I knew one particular individual that had a fresh warrant issued, and I went to the place where I know that he lived and found him around dinner time having an evening with his wife, and there was no resistance, a little bit of verbal fuss, but no incident occurred. I was able to effect the arrest, and as I recall, it was a Friday night, and this is a low-income individual, number of different criminal offenses in the background, and so I brought him in without incident, and his wife couldn't raise the money, the banks weren't open, things along those lines, so that he couldn't get out over the weekend, and the criminal gang that he ran with kind of took advantage of the situation and raped his wife over the weekend. And so I think about that all the time. Now, it was my duty, this was a valid warrant, things along those lines, but what if I had waited until Monday? What if just one variable in that equation had changed? Would those unfortunate events have unfolded that way? And it really is striking. It's, was I responsible for that later crime that occurred simply by quote unquote doing my job? That can be kind of like almost as shocking as a death. To know that you caused suffering at that level.
Right. And did you? I hear you. And I really, I so appreciate you sharing this very vulnerable story with us and your thoughts about it. And I remember one time I said something to a teacher of mine about something that had happened. And he said, well, first of all, we don't know, right? So we don't know. This is the challenge, right? We could do the whole time talking together just about this incident. And we don't know what could have happened differently or what would have happened differently based on the timing. We know that you went, you did your job, you did it, sounds to me like you did it respectfully and calmly and as peacefully as possible. And this thing happened, and I never want karma to be blame. So I'll say, we all, in this scenario, we all have lived our decisions. You decided to do your job. This person had made other decisions that called for you to knock on his door. And then his, I don't even want to say colleagues, whatever, made a decision to attack his wife. But in a scenario like this, I remember one time a teacher of mine saying something like, but you don't know if maybe it would have been worse. Like if they had come, would have there been violence and bloodshed? I mean, what happened to her is truly horrible. And what their decision, I find, and I'm sorry because I can't say it without sounding judgmental, I find their decision to be very reprehensible. So if he had been there, we don't know what would have happened differently.
And that gets into the concept of tangled hierarchies, maybe not a Buddhist concept, but I've learned about this through other teachings, that we can't figure it out. We don't know all the variables. We only know the ones that are in our awareness, but there's probably a heck of a lot more that's taking place outside our level of awareness. And so trying to figure things out is really a fool's errand.
Yes. And we can make ourselves nuts doing it, right?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And so, I mean, obviously you still think about it. I'm having this sense though at this moment that although it still is something that will stay with you because you're a thinking, caring person and something difficult happens, so you're not going to skip along going, la, la, la. Like, I don't think you're that person, right?
Right.
I don't get that sense from you at all. They're like, la, 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 it happened. So what are some things you do to process this and to work with this?
That's part of the practice, is the letting go of trying to figure things out. And again, going back to my early adolescence or teenage years, having some familiarity with Zen is all about just letting go of whatever thoughts float into mind. And recently I've gotten involved in the work of Shinzen Young. I was attracted to him because he has a background in esoteric Buddhism, but he has since become more oriented with Zen and basic Vipassana meditation. And he's developed a framework called unified mindfulness, where the goal is to develop just mindfulness skills. And those are defined by concentration power, sensory clarity, and equanimity. Now, the concentration power is the ability to focus, to keep your mind on whatever the object of the meditation is. And the sensory clarity is to become aware of those sensory inputs and divide them by whether they show up in the mental space, whether they be pictures or moving video, whether they be internal audio or even external audio, wherever that's occurring, usually between the ears, or if it's a physical sensation in the body, and that could be emotional body or it could be the actual physical body. And the idea here is that by dividing them, we are then making them more digestible, so that when the thoughts, what I call see and hear, are attached, they have that electrical charge or that emotional charge, they're much more difficult to process or deal with. So by dividing them, having them binned into those specific categories, they're much more easy to process. And there's a further division that I find useful, which is to separate the see and the hear from the feel. And once you, quote unquote, drop the story associated with the see and the hear, then you can be more skillful with the energy of the emotion, where the focus can be on the feeling state. And that's really, I find, where the juice is. That, and the phrase is, experience multiplied by resistance leads to suffering.
I love that. Yes.
Whereas experience divided by awareness leads to freedom.
Oh, thank you. I've heard the first part of the equation. I don't remember ever being taught the second part. That is beautiful. Yes.
That's a big part of my practice now, is learning. You got to have the sensory clarity to know where and when those sense inputs are happening. But then you also have, and that's part of the equanimity, which is to allow experiences to rise and subside without any aversion or attachment. The equanimity is the let go. And when you divide those sensory inputs, again, see, hear, and feel, then they become a lot more digestible. You can process the experiences a lot more skillfully that way. Hey friends, we talk about some heavy subjects on Everyday Samurai because we have a commitment to truth, telling it like it is, and that's what being a warrior is all about. To prevail amid the harsh reality of life's challenges, you need to optimize your mind and body so you are always able to perform when it counts. That's why I recommend the scientifically honed supplements from Neurohacker Collective. These go far beyond the average daily vitamin to give you a competitive edge in all areas of your life. I got interested in nootropic supplements because I'd heard about their ability to provide superior mental acuity, clarity, and long-term brain health. What I found is that Neurohacker Collective has the best science-based nootropic formula available. I was so impressed with the company and team that I became an investor as well as a subscribing customer. Now I get a monthly bundle of their products that elevates cognitive function, personal energy, cellular regeneration, sleep quality, and optimizes the aging process. If you want to promote your best life with improved memory, focus, vitality, and stress resilience with the latest scientific and natural biochemistry support, check out Neurohacker Collective. You can get a 15% discount on your first order at everydaysamurai.life/neuro with the code EDSamurai. That's everydaysamurai.life/neuro, NEURO. And use the code EDSamurai at checkout for a 15% discount. Join me as a subscriber to one of their monthly bundle deals. That's everydaysamurai.life/neuro and use the code EDSamurai at checkout. We now return to our regularly scheduled program in progress.
So in your experiences and, going through this with this individual and then knowing what happened, and then did you have any other future experiences or dealings with this person?
Yes, that relates back to the idea of karmic connection, because I actually watched that individual that I arrested die in a very horrific way.
Ouch. Okay.
Unfortunately, there was nothing I could do to change it.
Right.
So, as I indicated, he was a person with a criminal history, and not a violent one, but a petty thief and burglar and things along those lines. And as we discussed earlier, the people that he ran with were capable of more horrific things and reprehensible things, as you quite rightly labeled. So this individual later, after he had gotten out and several months after the incident, was stealing fruit from a tree, someone else's tree, and he put up a metal ladder into the tree and was at the top of the ladder and reaching for a piece of fruit when the ladder slid and came across a power line, and he got electrocuted. And the strange thing about this was he was in such a position that the metal of the ladder and what he was touching wasn't moving. He wasn't released. He didn't fall to the ground. He actually stayed in place. And no one could move him or touch the ladder without putting themselves in danger. So he had to wait for the power company to come and shut off the electricity that was running the current through his body. And that took quite some time.
So hard.
And over the process of about 30 to 45 minutes, I got to see his body transform into a human candle, essentially. And it was a slow process. Now, he was already out of that body.
Dead.
He had already left the vessel, but the physical remains became a human torch. And again, I watched it happen slowly. So that picture shows up during my meditation, or sometimes, like I said, when I'm doing mundane tasks, and I'll literally flinch.
Of course.
But now, using the tools of unified mindfulness, now I can take that picture in my mind and separate it from the feeling, that impulse that makes me flinch. Now I can, separate the picture from the physical sensation in the body and more skillfully process that. So again, going back to that, having the awareness and the technique to apply in the moment when those painful or powerful emotions arise, I think has been very helpful.
Well, you've really been handed, so to speak, you've been gifted by your karma, some truly challenging situations that most of us are never going to have. And you have used them you've been able to use them in your practice and use your practice with them. And I'm thinking that is why you are the right person to help people with certain backgrounds, possibly. Is that fair for me to say it that way?
I appreciate those comments. I would like to offer these teachings, and again, they're not mine, but I think that the military, law enforcement, trauma survivors would really benefit from, again, using these tools of mindfulness and being able to process those powerful or painful emotions more skillfully. And hopefully that would lead to a reduction in what we're witnessing as, and what's being known as, a suicide epidemic among that veteran community.
Well, the good news about the teachings is also anything I'm saying isn't mine either. And it's because the Buddha sat and worked through his work in enlightenment and decided to bring them out into the world where I think he wanted them to be shared. So I don't think we have to feel like we're plagiarizing or anything like that, right? Because neither of us are saying like, hey, I invented this thing. Hi, I'm talking to Ken today. He invented enlightenment. Ken never said that, because he doesn't say that because he is representing something else. So that's not how we are, right?
And that's what I really appreciate about what you're doing here, is you're overcoming that imposter syndrome. Oh, who am I to teach or what have you? No, you're just drawing out experience from people that practice. And that's what I consider myself, as just a person who practices. So if I can share what I've learned in my practice with others and hopefully grant them the benefits that I've received through the practice, but really, it really falls back to the individual. And that's why I go back to individual liberation. That's the only way that suffering can be alleviated, is by people taking that action among themselves and then having something to contribute to others.
More and more, that's what so many of you are teaching me, probably because it's, how the saying, the student gets the lesson they need. I'm messing up the saying, but anyway.
When the student is ready, the master will appear.
There you go. And so many of you are appearing and offering me a similar lesson and it is about that working on yourself, because if you can't work on yourself, you can't really be able to help others. And any global sense of enlightenment really happens by individual, as it were. And maybe that's something that I need to keep learning, because maybe I was probably raised to think things like that were selfish. And so I appreciate you saying that.
In the military, we have this concept of triage. When there's a disaster that strikes, you have to fix your priorities of action.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be summed up very easily by the way the airlines teach you to put on your oxygen mask first and then help the person next to you.
Mm-hmm.
It really takes individual action, prioritizing your ability to internalize these teachings, and then being in a place where you can share them at whatever scale. It could be as minimal as just what we talked about.
Sure.
That resistance times experience leads to suffering, whereas experience divided by awareness will lead to liberation.
I just love that. Thank you so much. So at some point, and this is going to sound oversimple, by the way, so at some point you became Buddhist. So as you're going through these experiences in your life, were you already into Zen Buddhism at that time? When did Ken and Buddhism become friends?
As friends and acquaintances, I would say when I was a teenager, again, reading those Zen and the martial arts books
Mm-hmm.
and things along those lines. And then again, the ninja boom with Stephen K. Hayes introduced me to the concepts. I don't necessarily put myself in the bin of being a Buddhist, although all the evidence indicates, as I said earlier, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
comfortable person in anyone's church. And I see that a lot of these teachings are universal. What I appreciate about Buddhism is the fact that they make it easy to remember these concepts by giving you clear number, like the Four Noble Truths and the Three Refuges and the Eightfold Path and the 10 Precepts. And I think anybody who wants a systematic way of coming to understand their own mind derive benefit from the teachings of Buddhism. And then you can use those mindfulness skills in whatever religious belief that you might have.
True. They are life skills. I love that you use the word systematic, because I often think that of the Buddhist teachings as very systematic. And not all of my colleagues and brothers and sisters in the practice agree with that approach, but it might be just the function of how I think. But I like that systematic approach too. And something I like to say is that I feel like the Buddha tried to make it as simple as possible for us to get, because he knew that the doing is the hard part. Yeah, that's just what's always occurred to me. It's like, no, he didn't want to make it complicated to understand, because it's complicated to do. It's not, I don't think it's easy to get rid of suffering in my life. And it's not easy for me to sometimes not be judgmental or angry, or, the different things that I have, my challenges, we all have our challenges, the things I work with.
I think that one of the other things that is valuable about the Buddhist teachings is they're not trying to figure out what is ultimate reality. They're doing it by way of process of elimination, which is very scientific and comports very well with a samurai-related martial arts approach, because how do you make a blade sharp? Well, you shave off the excess metal that no longer serves. Buddhism is like that as well, is that you go through this process of, well, that's not me, and that's not ultimate reality. And ultimately, you come to the realization that all of our human experience is based on impermanence, that there's no ultimate reality in this world. Again, the systematic approach of Buddhism is very useful. Even in the Western traditions, when you talk about spiritual concepts, you go back to the ancient Latin spiritus. That means breath. And what is breath? Breath is ungraspable, yet it's a process of continual expansion and contraction. So it doesn't necessarily need to have a Buddhist flavor. It can come from anywhere, really. But ultimately, there is nothing that you can grasp onto in this world, because things are always changing. And when you come to understand that at a very deep, fundamental level, that's where peace comes from. That's where a liberation happens, because you can stop grasping.
And now that makes a lot of sense. And especially like that shaving off, because it's like, yeah, we're learning to let go of things that we're just carrying around that are just leading to the suffering and weighing us down. And now we're talking, you and I together, we've talked about some actual deaths, and we're talking about things that aren't the actual physical death, but are the disappointments. And I think that, and you've been giving great advice, but I want to get even more clear and specific, just because I think it's helpful to everyone. And let's hear the advice that you would give, as a Buddhist today, maybe to your past self. And then also what advice would you give to all of us who are experiencing loss in these lives? So I guess I just asked you two questions at once. I'm sorry.
Well, actually, I'm going to add another story from the military side that deals with death, but also with the strong emotions of being unskillful in your communication. So as I indicated earlier, I was a explosive ordnance disposal technician and did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. As a specialist who was what's known as an enabler on the battlefield, I cleared the way so that maneuver units could go do their thing, and we were relatively high-value personnel in theater. So I was always escorted to go deal with the bomb on the side of the road or wherever that it was found. And there were times where I had arguments with my security team. Hey, you're not doing it the way I want you to, or what have you. And, we could think about it as petty squabbles or just being technical.
Sure.
About who's doing what and who should be doing what, who's in charge of the mission. Is it me because I'm the escorted package, or is it you because you're in charge of the convoy or what have you? So arguments happen, personality conflicts, and then guess what? Those two people that I had a conversation with died, and I never got to resolve the hard feelings that we had.
Oh, okay.
So again, number one, we could talk about the ego and what it really means in the scheme of human affairs. But more importantly, at the personal level, now I have this unresolvable conflict that dwells with me and again pops up during those quiet moments, those mundane tasks where my mind can simply wander. Well, that tends to flash up. So what do? Again, I go back to that idea of part of the human unfolding, and I can't really figure things out. And I can't do anything to resolve it with those individuals. The only place that I can do the work is within my own experience, within my own mind. It's to have the awareness to know when it arises. That's where the sensory clarity and the concentration power come from. But then the real tool is the equanimity. It's the allowing of it to come and go without having any aversion or attachment to that experience. There's nothing I can do to change it.
Okay.
So
right, it happened.
It's a historical fact.
Yes.
The only thing that can change is the way I perceive it in the moment, in the here and now. And that's where the equanimity comes from. Again, you have to have the awareness. That's what our basic meditation practice does. But then you have to have a technique of letting go. And for me, I've learned this through Buddhist channels as well as other channels, even what you might consider Christian channels, that feeling the vibration, and this really gets explained well within the esoteric Buddhist traditions, again, Shingon Buddhism or Mikkyo, the secret teachings, describes all in existence as having vibration, and the ability to feel vibration within the physical body. Again, this goes back to your sensory clarity within the unified mindfulness system. Feel the vibration and let it just do what it does, and it will dissipate naturally. That becomes a skill.
And trust that. Because is that hard to trust that at first?
It's a practice, and it's just like lifting a weight.
Okay.
And Shinzen Young in the Unified Mindfulness System also describes your meditation practice as a sweaty workout, and that every time something like that emerges, so number one, you need to be able to see, hear, and feel and divide those things and put them into their separate bins. So you need to have the concentration power and the sensory clarity to know which sense experience is arising. But then the equanimity piece, you have to develop over time through repetition. Your mind's going to wander, so bring it back. I find myself during meditation telling stories or reliving experiences or thinking about the future. You come back to the power of now and know that every sense experience is usually a picture or a sound associated with a feeling. And so you separate this picture and the sound and focus on the feeling, and then dive into the specifics, get really, really clear, and look at it like a scientist in the sense of you want to know the physical location within the body.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know the qualities, hot, cold, what color is it? What do the edges look like? Is it stable or is it dynamic? Is it moving? Is it localized or is it global? You want to get really clear on those qualities. And then the intensity, how strong is it? And then over time, and the more you stay with it, which again, you have to have the concentration power to stay with that feeling, the sensation in the body, it changes. It starts to become more wave-like and less particle-like. And that's where the magic happens. That's where the feeling of liberation comes from, in these little bite-sized chunks.
Mm-hmm.
So the advice is have the awareness and then have the tools to stay with it long enough to watch the particles become wave.
Okay.
And then that transforms into personal energy
that
you can use for other more skillful purposes.
Yes. Thank you. Now I understand also the sweaty workout analogy, because that takes a lot of strength. And so what we're doing a lot of times is we're core training. And I have to pardon myself because this is an example. I say this over and over again. I haven't graced you with it, but now I am, about the whole core training thing. But yeah, so we're core training and we're building up our strength. And so, the sweaty workout thing, absolutely, because it takes using all of our muscles, so to speak, that we're developing, and all those tools to handle the resistance, the strength of those difficult feelings coming up, and to remain focused to say, okay, here they are, to sort them into the buckets, so to speak, and then to sit with it and allow it to turn into that energy.
Absolutely.
Not easy. So it goes back to that, what I said, because the Buddha knew it was not easy to do. So that's why he tried to make it easier to talk about.
Yeah, the theory needs to be nice and clear so that you can move along the direction of your personal training, inculcating the lessons through repetition and through practice. And again, going back to the samurai-related martial arts, there's a term in Japanese called suburi, which is just repeated practice of a simple movement. So raising the sword straight up and down in a cutting fashion. We do our suburi in Aikido, which is one of the arts that I study. There's 7 suburi. So there's 7 different basic ways of cutting with the sword or thrusting with the sword, and you do those repeated practices, again, shaving off extraneous movement. You become more skillful and use less energy in the practice. And the same is true with lifting weights. You become more accustomed to lifting that size weight, and then you can move on to higher weights. In the suburi of the samurai practices, you can move faster because you're expending less wasted energy. You have more efficiency of movement. In lifting a weight, you're going to have more strength so you can lift a heavier weight. In mindfulness, you're going to have more periods of tranquility and more concentration power so that you can stay focused in the here and now longer and gain deeper insights. Analogy that I'll borrow from Shinzen Young in the Unified Mindfulness curriculum is that at first we are scraping along the surface, but over time, through practice, we start to penetrate deeper into the source of who we really are. And that's when we come into contact with ultimate reality. But it takes that repetition, because for a while you're going to be scraping along at the surface and running up against obstacles, and we all have these afflictions, these aversions, these attachments. In Japanese, it's known as bonno, the afflictions, the klesas, I believe it's in the original Sanskrit.
Yeah, these things that come up. And yes, I have them come up also still, where I'll be sitting and then something will come up and I'll be like, oh, I didn't know that was still a thing for me. Or, all of that, the recognition of I didn't know I was upset about that, or I didn't know that was a thing that was still circling around, but here it is. So it's still part of me. And some days I think I'm digging with a spoon. Right? To get through scraping through the surface. Some days I think I'm digging with a spoon.
It can certainly feel that way. And you can also get frustrated with yourself because you thought that you had cleared that obstacle. You thought that it was behind you, yet there's still residue there. By looking at that residue within yourself, still bubbling up to the surface now and then, you can look at that as fuel. In unified mindfulness, they say that all your experiences are grist for the mill. All of it is potential energy for you to unleash, to unlock. It's still stuck within your existence somewhere, whether it's physically embedded in the carbon-based memory of your cells or bones. They used to say that we learn in our bones, and it's one of the reasons why I have a lot of arthritis, is I've absorbed a lot of emotional content into those places. So the process of releasing could be based in the carbon-based memory of our physical being. It could be non-localized, but it's there. From where we don't need to figure that out. Again, that's just chasing your tail. But the idea that those memories are still there and they're there for you. They're not happening to you. They're there for you to unlock, to release, to transform from their present state to something more liberating. And in this way, your painful experiences can actually turn into energy that can be used for a more skillful life. Actually, I'll borrow another phrase from Shinzen Young, or another analogy. That the energy, and he uses this with the concept of being fatigued during meditation, so you become sleepy or what have you. It's just like turning on the water in a garden hose. The garden hose is slack, it's limp, but when you turn on the water and allow it to flow, the water pressure will straighten out the hose.
Yes.
And so just like fatigue that is liberated from its stuck state, your painful memories and experiences, when they are liberated from their stuck state, they change from being a particle to a wave. They become the energy that can hold you straight up, just like the hose will straighten up in a garden hose when the water's flowing. So that's the idea.
That's a great analogy. See, so helpful.
Yeah, not mine, but I'll use it skillfully.
That you are the one that is teaching it now, and that is what's beautiful, and that you knew to apply it to our time now. So Ken, what else would you recommend to those of us who are dealing with these, metaphoric and actual deaths? What other kinds of tools, techniques would you like to tell us about?
As I indicated earlier, I'm involved in the esoteric approach, which is like Vajrayana Buddhism, but from a very unique Japanese perspective. And within Shingon Buddhism, there is a meditation device known as the Aji Kan. And the Aji is the Ah symbol. And we come back to the idea of vibration, that all the elements that make up the universe are composed of vibration. And the first of which, the fundamental vibration underlying all of existence, is that Ah character. That Ah vibration permeates all of existence and gives rise to the myriad elements, the building blocks of the universe. And so it's easy for us as human beings to let our minds wander. So part of that esoteric Buddhist or Vajrayana approach is to have powerful imagery that we then embody. So I use this Aji Kan device, which consists of that Ah symbol in Sanskrit. It's just the character.
Okay.
Yet it exists within a field of infinite consciousness, which is the moon disk. And the moon disk is, again, that ineffable consciousness that is the field in which all phenomena arise. And then there's the lotus flower, which symbolizes the substance of the universe, which is also known as compassion or love. And the Ah is that vibration that is the wisdom. That's the discernment that the universe uses to create. So it's infinite consciousness with infinite loving, compassionate substance that is directed by discerning wisdom. And so all of that is encapsulated in that Aji Kan meditation device. So when I conduct my meditation, it's partially eyes open and I'm gazing softly at this Aji Kan. And every time my mind wanders, I come back to that Ah. That Ah is the vibration, and that vibration symbol reminds me to look for the vibration within my own physical body.
Wow.
So it's a very powerful tool for the technical aspect of meditation.
That sounds very helpful. And it sounds like really something that really help focus and keep us in the right perspective and mindset.
It also reminds us of impermanence because the vibration is on, off, on, off. Alan Watts described this story of sound, and sound is not constant. It's sound, silence, sound, silence. If there was no empty field, you wouldn't be able to hear anything because there needs to be discrimination. There needs to be this and that in this human time-space reality We need to have that. And that's really the ultimate reality of the universe, is the game of hide and go seek. It's illustrated nicely in computer code. It's ones and zeros, on, off, expansion, contraction. And that's the real game of the universe. And so when we can have a symbol like the Aji Khan that can remind us of the vibratory nature of all reality, we can also learn the lesson of impermanence and look for it within our own bodies.
That makes me think so many thoughts come up. I won't share all of them because we don't have time, but so many thoughts. So now I think, like years ago, so long ago, when I was a computer programmer and I used Boolean logic, which was ones and zeros, maybe that was my pre-Buddhist training, because that was certainly when I was not a Buddhist. Who knows? So before I let you go, because you have been so generous with your time and sharing, and I'm so appreciative, I just want to check and see, is there something else that you would like to say and teach to all of us before we have to let you go back to your regularly scheduled life?
I appreciate that opportunity. Number one, formal practice is indispensable. And I define formal practice as anything over 10 minutes.
Beautiful.
So that gives you the awareness. So you can sit longer if you have the time and the interest and the necessity. That's certainly helpful, but no less than 10 minutes per day. But also, and this is key, is to have those micro hits throughout the day as things arise. As I indicated earlier, is to have the awareness, but then also have a technique to use, to apply in the moment when things go up, when things arise in consciousness, because we all get them. So have the tools at your disposal, practice them deliberately, and at duration, develop that skill, those unified mindfulness skills of concentration power, sensory clarity, and equanimity. But have a tool like the feeling exercise, like feeling vibration in the moment when those powerful emotions arise. And so that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you want to connect with me, you can see all my socials, my website, my web shop, and things along those lines at link.everydaysamurai.life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So everyone, definitely make sure you check in with Ken at link.everydaysamurai.life, because I know that he has a lot more for us, and you're going to want to keep in touch with him. Thank you.
Friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai and look forward to seeing you next time. Be sure to subscribe to our feed so as to stay up to date with our latest episodes. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here, consider offering a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcatcher app. Share the show with a friend or someone you think would resonate with our message. Remember, you can support your best mental sharpness, stress resilience, and skillful aging with the supplements from Neurohacker Collective. Visit everydaysamurai.life/neuro and use the code EDSamurai at checkout for a deep 15% discount. That's everydaysamurai.life/neuro and use the code EDSamurai at checkout. The show notes for this episode, including links to the resources mentioned, are available at everydaysamurai.life/53. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.